Hi, I'm Craig Moss from the Cyber Readiness Institute, and I'm here with Sasha to talk about a recent article that I wrote for the Dow Jones Risk Journal called The Weakest Link: Why Supply Chain Cybersecurity Starts with Small Business. Sasha, the first thing that I want to ask you about is really the whole idea, do hackers really target small businesses? Why would they go after small businesses instead of big business?
First and foremost, thanks for taking the time to write the article because I think it's a really important topic. Look, a hacker's main aim is to find the weakest spot and to be able to get in. They don't care if it's big, small, medium, it doesn't matter. They're looking for a threat vector. The challenge is that large corporations typically have really ample resources at their disposal, but both in terms of knowledge of what the attacks might look like given emerging technology. They certainly have the capacity in terms of being able to develop and put into their ecosystem technology tools to help them identify and thwart attacks, and to be able to ensure that they have a systematic approach in place around the technologies that are being run every day. What makes the small and medium-sized business community, I'll say, appealing to an attacker is the fact that most of those organizations do not have the same type of resources at their disposal in terms of both having human capital that are experts in this space at their disposal
Mhm.
24/7, nor do they have potentially the financial resources at bay to be able to also put into place the technology enhancements that can help to identify and thwart it. So it just makes it an easier target. It's not that they're saying, hey, let me go after a smaller, medium-sized company, and that's where I'm actually pointing my wares. The larger organizations typically have a shield in place that it just bounces off of. And so honestly, for an attacker, they probably don't even know it's a small company versus a large company. But if they are going after it, that's certainly the area where generally they're going to have greater potential for penetration.
That's a really interesting point. So the small company is really just seen as it could be a gateway to the large company. They try to get in
Correct.
and then they navigate. The other thing you mentioned that I like is we often talk about cybersecurity in terms of people, process, and technology. And for small businesses, they clearly don't have the same resources to spend on technology. But you also brought up they probably may not have the same people expertise either. So they're
Yeah,
really behind in a couple key areas.
exactly. I mean, if you think about it, the vast majority of entrepreneurs are quote unquote living paycheck to paycheck. It's about how do I keep the revenue coming in the door to keep the lights on so that I can keep getting my product out there. Unfortunately, it's survival, hierarchy. If we want to use Maslow's laws, right? This is where we find ourselves is that it's not that it's not important. It's just lower in the area of prioritization of keeping the lights on.
I was on a call yesterday with some behavioral scientists, and I was talking to them about how do you get people to shift from being reactive to preventative? And they all said that's the million-dollar question, just in
Yeah.
terms of people in general. So with that, one of the things that we've seen happening a lot, of course, is AI. Everybody's talking about generative AI, the use of AI agents. What kind of new opportunities does it bring to the company from a positive side? But also, what are some of the new risks that you see?
Let's talk about the negatives first, and I'll talk about the positives. On the negative side, if you think about the kind of a tech approach, historically, it took somebody that had a pretty significant understanding around coding, around embedding, et cetera, right? And those skills were not quote unquote just easily at your fingertips to get after. What AI and specifically generative AI has also helped advance is that it's lowered the bar of entry from the standpoint of having to understand the technology components to be able to make a package of code, et cetera, much more easier to acquire. So this opens up the door to a significant population potentially of adverse players that, quite frankly, were not in the game to begin with because of the tools that are now at their disposal. So that's the downside, and this is where we see, more quote unquote potential attacks. On the flip side, that lower bar of entry in terms of understanding, et cetera, is also available to those of us that are small, where it might have taken us years or months to be able to understand a potential change in terms of keeping our software updated or understanding how to best use passwords and things of that nature. The generative AI and the AI agents can also now be deployed within an organization that's very small, even one single entrepreneur that is a solo practitioner. They now have at their disposal some of these tools that they can also deploy within their own ecosystem if they spend a little bit of time in terms of standing up some of these tools. Now, is it as robust as these big packages that large corporations have? Absolutely not. But does it potentially give them an opportunity to also understand, interpret, and be able to deploy at a faster speed? Absolutely. So I see it as almost this balancing act of the good guys and the bad guys now have access to technology that just was not practical, say, 2, 3 years back.
From a defense standpoint, for the small business, though, they have to be aware that the speed and scale that the hackers have now is far greater. So they can have Gen AI customize like a hyper personalized phishing message and send it out to 1 million companies. With the advent of AI and AI agents, that the inherent risk for every business is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And what does a small business do to try to reduce that risk?
Well, so I was out in California this past week, and uh, I heard a comment which I think is really true, which is there are only two types of companies. There's the company that knowingly knows that they've already been attacked and they've been able to thwart it. And there's the company that's been attacked and does not know that they've been attacked as of yet. So I think this comment around inherent risk, growing and being more ubiquitous is absolutely true. I think this is where the practical pieces in terms of how are companies thinking about what is the data that really matters to them? What are the business processes that really matter to them? Have they spent 5 or 10 minutes, quite frankly, making sure that they actually have old school pen and paper written down somewhere, the phone number of their IT personnel? Do they understand who their insurance person is that they need to be reaching out to? So I have conversations with small and medium-sized businesses. They're like, well, I have it. I'm like, well, where do you have it? And they said, well, it's on a file on my computer. I'm like, okay, well, if you're locked out of your computer, what do you need to do? Right. So I think some of this is, and they look at me, they're like, oh my goodness, you're right, right? But I think some of this is actually just taking a couple minutes and really thinking through, I can't open my computer. What do I need to do? And if you can't do it through old school, like in a notebook somewhere that you can get to with a phone number that you know who you need to dial, you're really quote unquote, a fish out of water. So I think this concept of these risks being more ubiquitous, the likelihood of you being attacked or have already been attacked, you don't even know it yet, are all there. But what are you doing in terms of your response? I think is actually the place where we need to be focusing some of our attention, which isn't to say that we shouldn't still be practicing good hygiene. Do we have the right passwords? Are we backing up information effectively? Are you updating your software? Some of the core four that we talk about within the Cyber Readiness Institute as being really solid hygiene practices needing to be in place, but also really thinking through what is your recovery plan? And I think that is where we also need to make sure we've got people spending a bit of time.
I think you're absolutely right there. So it's a balance of prevention, but you can't assume that you're going to be able to prevent it all the time. Backups are so critical. If you look at a ransomware attack, if somebody has backups that are off the network and they have a ransomware attack, they can pretty much tell the hackers to get lost because they have the data. If
Yeah,
you don't have that, you're in trouble. You're in
yeah,
deep, deep trouble. So it's that incident response plan. At CRI, that's one of the things we focus on is how do you build that? I like what you said also about prioritization is a key thing. And the way that we've been able to kind of bring that home to small businesses in particular is to think about data loss, like what
yeah,
data is most important to protect, and then to think about business continuity. What software, what hardware, what data do you need to be able to run your business? And
yeah,
it differs from company to company. Some might have a huge risk on data loss, like a law firm or an accounting firm, huge risk on that. They don't really need their website to run their business. If you're an
right.
e-com site, your website is running your business. That's what's bringing in the revenue. So I think that's a key factor companies need to think about. What you mentioned briefly about the core four, and that's one of the things at the Cyber Readiness Institute that we've focused on. And then the cyber leader that leads the cyber readiness effort. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So look, and if you're in a large corporation, you typically have a chief information security officer that's thinking about this 24/7 and has at their disposal a team of folks that are able to kind of think about this. When we're talking about a smaller, medium-sized business, the intention here is not necessarily to have somebody who is a quote unquote expert, but somebody who really is paying attention to what's going on, understands what are the key pieces of data and technology that are really instrumental in keeping the business running, and that they are able to, if it's more than one person in the business, ensure that some of the hygiene habits that we talked about earlier are in fact being followed. One of the things that we know is that human behavior still leads to the majority of incidents that occur, right? And now the argument may swing in terms of what that percentage looks like, but we can all agree it's more than 50%. So if we're practicing good human hygiene behavior, are we actually, using proper passwords? Is the software being, updated and patched regularly in terms of new releases that are out there? Are you backing up the information in a timely way that's required for you to be able to run your business effectively? And last but not least, are you also aware of the types of phishing efforts that are going on? And is everybody aware of that and really practicing those things with consistency? And I think that's the key here. It is about consistency,
Mhm.
that is becomes so important. And that leader really becomes, I'll call it the cheerleader of the human capability. So it's not so much about having the technical know-how. It really is more about business process,
Mhm.
and being the champion for the business, being able to be around.
To me, I like the word you used, the cheerleader. It's really about the people and process side of things. How do you build up that culture? And one of the ways that I often think about it is the leader has to build awareness of the risk and the issues, commitment to doing something about it. People have to be committed that this actually matters, and
Yeah.
then action. What are the simple actions you want them to take? And the Core Four has been really effective at kind of communicating that to small businesses.
Yeah.
The leader, we've had some great success with people that are non-technical being great cyber leaders in small companies. People
Yeah.
that,
And I think that's the key here, right? Which is we're not asking the leader to have this deep technical expertise. We're asking this leader is to be aware of, understand the critical business activities, and that there is their arms around what that looks like. That's what really we're asking about.
well, thanks so much. It's been great talking to you about this.
Yeah,
And
it's been
we
fun.
encourage everybody to check out the Cyber Readiness Institute website and also look for the article in the Dow Jones Risk Journal. Thanks very
Thanks.
much.